And I just want to add, I moved to New York City right after 9/11, so as you can imagine, moment. And after a few years, I think 5 years, I started working on these poems, and I didn't know at the time, but they became, a series of love poems, which I call Love in Strange Choices, and it's the three movements of the heart is divided into three. But when in hindsight, when I look at the book, I'm still exploring occupation in a different way. Not in all the poems, obviously, but it does sort of come through, like the occupation of love. I have this one poem called In Jerusalem, so it comes back. So definitely, you explore the things, but there is that current that keeps surfacing itself in different aspects of your life.
Well, let's explore a little bit more of the sort of legacy of conflict. Inara, you said that you want people to feel even rage. Some of these conflicts that you're writing about are they date from the Soviet Union, and so is the rage enough? Is it something that to feel rage about something that you can't go back and change?
Well, I was thinking they can rage at me. I mean, that's really honestly, like I was like raging at the page or raging at what's there. I suppose I'm just interested in provoking some sort of thinking or some sort of. I'm especially interested, I suppose, when we're able to have narratives that jolt people out of whatever conventional narrative is that they've always been following. I'm really interested in sort of getting people to think more deeply about nuance and complexity and things like that. And in my case, for example, what Robin's referring to, my family left Latvia at the end of World War II, and they were sort of leaving because the Soviets had taken over and were occupying the country. Well, there's sort of this potentially noble narrative about resisting, communism and down with the Iron Curtain and, sort of the tragedy of that. And yet the reality of it is far more complicated, that you had people who essentially sided with Germans occupied before the Russians occupied, and you had people who sided essentially with the Germans. And so it isn't suddenly such a noble narrative. It isn't such an easy narrative. And there's all sorts of, there's paradox and, contradiction. And I feel like those things are so important too when we're talking about conflict, rather than just kind of locking into what seems like a really pleasant story of redemption or,
So the conflict within a group of people who might seem at first glance to be victimized, but also are victimizing as well.
Absolutely. And then also too, like to look at the sort of internal conflict of what it means to be someone trying to process this as well. What is our own sort of internal conflict that we have in these sorts of situations?
Well, Nell, you have told me before about how editors and others have wanted to, say, pigeonhole you or make you write about certain things that you didn't want to write about, or you wanted to write about, say, the Biafran War. Right? Is that right?
I did. When you're starting out, you write whatever you want, basically, and then eventually you meet with agents and editors, and so one of the things. Okay, so anyway, let's skip that part. No, so one of the things I was told, I took my work, I was very excited, I had this novel idea, and I thought I was done with it. The agent said, show me something, show me an excerpt. So I took this excerpt and I gave to her, and she read it, and she said, She said, well, yeah, it wasn't very good. But she said, even had it been good, her response was not about the quality of it anyway. Her response was, well, Chimamanda Adichie has already written about Biafra. And I thought, as if only one Nigerian can ever write about the Biafran War. It was sort of an eye-opening moment for me where I realized there's a quota if you're a certain kind of person to write about certain things. The world is not big enough for me. So like, they don't believe they can, make money off of me basically because someone else has made the money, all the money that's to be made out of that same topic. And so I said, well, being that I was naive at the time, I said, well, it's not really about Biafra. It's about like family and something else, And she was like, don't you write anything else? And I said, well, yeah, I have these terrible stories. I'm not a very good short story writer. She said, well, send them to me anyway. And so I sent them to her, and those stories are in the book now. But the good news, the other good news is that I did write my novel after all, and I wrote about Biafra and something else. So it wasn't quite only about Biafra, like I told her. But now she totally, I think what she meant was really not that Chimamanda Adichie has already written about it. For her personally, it was also that, actually I'm not quite sure what it was for her, but I think that she was trying to get me to, think about ways to make it more my own, like unique, instead of just, doing something only Biafra themed, because I think there is that concern about how to sell things in the world, and unfortunately that's a realistic thing. I don't think that my agent was, closed-minded or whatever. She's a wonderful agent, but I think she had to think about marketing as well, and unfortunately that's part of, the writing world, which I'm learning a lot about.
I guess, Jeff, I'd like to ask you a question about sort of going out and seeking conflict, because it seems to me that's one of the things that you do and do very well. And not only does it seem brave to me, but I'm really interested in how you deal with people who you really don't like, or more than that, who maybe even are repellent in some ways. Say the Cossack that you read about, or maybe some certain kinds of fundamentalists, or the Ugandan. So how do you deal with that, both as a do you go in with, so you don't say, okay, I'm going to reconcile, but what kind of, sort of how much of your mind is made up already in terms of how you're going to deal with this person, I guess?
Well, the Ugandan situation, my mind was made up. I was opposed to killing queer people. Yeah. But my understanding of David Bahati, the man who was behind this, who I don't dislike actually. And there's some people who get upset with me for that. And David still calls on holidays. And he says, I believe if I come to America and you know where I am, you and the gays will kill me. He has an unusual idea. He believes that there's an American television host named Rachel Maddow. Guess her name. She's a woman, and he accuses she and I of being a gay couple. I would be gay. So he has this unusual idea, and he says, of course, if you come back, I'll arrest you. He says, of course I'll arrest you. He says, until then, I hope you have a good Christmas. And because there's this intimacy, and those are the kinds of people, I seek out conflict partly because this is the thing that you write about again and again and again. I'm fascinated by this sort of this grit that is both an embrace and a wrestling match at the same time, and which you sort of recognize yourself as a writer as complicit in what this person is, that you can't be a part. It's very easy for us to say, look at this monster, look at this person I disagree with, I would never want to talk with them. I'm looking for those people with whom suddenly there is a strange resonance and a recognition, not a reconciliation, but a recognition. David Bahati, the author of this terrible bill, and I, we love arguing with one another. We love talking with one another. And that's sort of when sometimes, I start to feel around in a story. If I don't like the person, that piece that I read the other day, the Cossack, I wanted to get away from him. I did not like him, and I wouldn't want to write about him further. There's nothing there unless it's unsettling, unless I can't draw a clear line between me and someone who rejects maybe everything that I value. If that line is blurry, and I think that's where we find humanness. We find humanness in our engagement with what we want to other as monstrous. that's what I go, and I don't know what that would be. I'm looking for that grip that's like a hug and like a wrestling match at the same time.
Right. Well, I know that, I think you're suspicious of this. I'm a little suspicious of, we were kind of joking about healing and things like that. I tend to be a little suspicious of narratives that are, easy kind of redemption stories. And there's a lot of the conflicts in the world seem intractable and seem incurable, and yet we sort of write into those conflicts a lot. Yet I am curious to hear from any of you if there have been any moments that have surprised you from something you've written where there was a gesture or something that it affected someone in some way that is positive, that did lead to something, at least a step in the right direction in your mind. No.
I write about like the LGBTQ communities in Nigeria, so I have stories about that. Anyway, so I was recently in London for the King Prize, and before that I had gotten some death threats on Facebook saying that if you do that Gloria and Grace thing, because I have two stories where the characters are Gloria and Grace and they happen to be lesbians, and so I got messages on Facebook saying if you do that Gloria and Grace thing in Nigeria, we will kill you. And then multiple people actually sent me that to make sure that I had gotten the message. So then eventually I quit Facebook, it was getting too much. Anyway, but when I went to London, I had a huge African population there with me, and it was interesting. The people who would come very quietly to me, they won't say anything in the audiences or anything. They won't say, like, oh, that was nice to read that story, whatever, but they come to me very privately and say, thank you for writing that story, it means a lot to me. And, some of the people who would come to me were not necessarily LGBTQ, just women would come to me and say, those issues you brought up, like, I can't conceive, and you don't know what I've been through because I could not conceive for my husband, and so she feels like there are many women who will come and just say thank you for writing my story and that sort of thing. But those are things that there's still shame attached to it, so they could never publicly open up and just have the conversation in the open air. But it means something that they see somebody is trying to write about it. I don't know that it'll make that much of a difference, at least not right away, but at least maybe eventually people will start talking about it and like stigma will reduce, and maybe eventually some women will start to realize it's not your fault if you can't conceive. It could be your husband too, Not to assign blame or anything, but in terms of just feeling less of a burden or less worthy in society.
Well, you've obviously made a difference in their lives, in their individual lives, and that's a kind of change too, because that's one of the reasons we write, is to connect with other people, and it is surprising, I think, as a writer sometimes when someone says to you, oh, you've written my story, or you've written something that affects me deeply, when that's not always even your intention necessarily. Anyone else want to speak to that? That notion of maybe changing, a reader's perspective with what you've written?
Even if you don't think the change is happening, even if you're opening the conversation, that's a step towards something changing. There's so much we don't know. Like she said, I think a lot of these places of conflict. I was going to mention the women. I think that's a really important thing to sort of address, which is that those voices are not only are they not represented, but these are the voices that they have so much more at stake. And so these are private battles associated with a lot, not only shame, but traditions, and it goes on and on and on. But having that conversation start, I think microscopically, these are really important.
I think too that you know, the sort of, there's interesting things that, another book of mine that begins with spending a month with, this is the beginning of my relationship with this organization that was involved in Uganda, but years before that, and spending a month living with this group of young men, really lovely people, really people who wanted to be good, wanted very much to be good, and had gotten themselves involved, as so often is the case. Wonderful young people get themselves to find a channel that is pretty destructive. And I wrote about the experience of living with them and becoming close with them. And then I wrote about some of, you know, what I had found out about this organization, about its role in international conflicts, which is bad in a simple way. And I remember afterwards, and I gave it to a young man with whom I was closest, and you know, wait for what he was going to say. And he calls up and he says, I hope you don't think this is going to change my mind at all. And I was startled because I thought he hadn't known about what the group he was involved with was doing in terms of, you know, making sure nasty governments get guns, weapons, and all that kind of thing. And he hadn't known. And sort of his faith and loyalty remained anyways. And so I was very despairing. Except that over the years, you keep talking to those people and you realize that when someone says, absolutely not, you change their mind, the fact that they do continue to talk, and I suppose maybe this puts me back in sort of the dialogue, that's not necessarily healing, it's not reconciled, it's not fixed, but there is a sort of broadening of perspective. And then you also, over time, your books go out in the world and someone comes to you that you least would have expected and said, yeah, that's, that was instrumental in helping me see this, that sometimes that person comes back to you and helps you see something new that you haven't seen. So these things roll on and add up.
There's something really, I'll just risk myself with my son cheesy, but there's something really profound about making visible the invisible. There's something really profound about speaking things that are unspoken. And I feel like, I don't know, I want to believe in that act. I want to believe that there's something that happens in that process when we write and we actually just put those things out there on the page, that they are somehow made manifest and that we can look at them and that conversations can happen and that people are seen. I don't know, I think that's really critical. I think there's this desperate need, especially for people who have long felt like they're invisible, to be seen.
So you seem to be doing that very much in your book or essay now on Baldock, which is a rest area in Oregon that a group of homeless people gathered and made a community for a while. Now, that's since been disbanded, but you're still in the lives of those
Yeah,
people.
I've still been following the lives of the people who are involved, and that's, I mean, there's a little bit of something in me, though, that I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with this, in that I keep following these lives. I am, seeing what's happening to these individuals and sort of the day-to-day struggles that they're going through, but until it's published, right? Until it's out there in the world, then it's not really doing anything yet. And there's always these moments where you especially if you're working on something that's longer and a longer-term project, where you do start to think, what good am I doing? Or, what is the point of this? Is this just for me? And then there seems to be this, the real urgency is about figuring out how it gets out in the world, how people, when it's seen by others, right? Then there's something